You're watching Forsaken Joe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy the story. Let's begin. A week had passed since the scene in the lobby. Mark had done his best to shake off the humiliation, but that sharp sting still lingered. When I told him the news, he looked at me like it was just another thing he had to endure. But I could see the pride in his eyes, his quiet, patient pride that never showed much, but it was always there. Guess what? I told him that evening, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. I got promoted. He stopped eating for a second and looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. No way. Yes way, I smiled, not trying to hide the excitement bubbling inside me. Case coordinator, and a raise. That's fantastic, Laura, he said, his voice sincere, though his eyes quickly dropped back to the plate of food. He tried to keep a straight face, but I saw the little tension in his jaw, the way his brow furrowed slightly. I know, I replied, pushing the plate aside. We should celebrate. Mark smiled, but there was a hesitation in his voice. Celebrating's hard when you're surrounded by people who think you're worth less than they are. I couldn't argue with that. His discomfort about our worlds being so far apart, his work clothes versus their expensive suits, always simmered under the surface. But tonight, I wanted something different. Let's just enjoy the night, okay? You, me, good food, no work clothes, no stress. We deserve it. He sighed, a half smile pulling at his lips. Okay, I'll try. Let's go. We dressed for dinner, Mark in his cleanest shirt, me in something nice, but not too fancy, not wanting to stand out in the wrong way. We headed to that trendy bistro I had wanted to try for months. It was the kind of place that made me feel a little out of place, but I was determined to make tonight about celebrating something good. The restaurant was sleek, modern, more marble, more expensive lighting. The kind of place where everyone knew each other and everything was curated to perfection. Mark's discomfort was immediate, but he said nothing as we were seated. He had that look on his face, like he was trying to convince himself he belonged there, even if he wasn't quite sure how to feel about it. We were halfway through dinner when I spotted him, Victor Hale, the man who had belittled Mark just days ago, sitting at a corner booth with someone who was not his wife. My stomach twisted and I felt Mark stiffen beside me, his hand subconsciously curling into a fist on the table. "Is that—" Mark started. "Yes," I whispered. "That's Victor, and he's with a paralegal from the firm." "His wife isn't here?" Mark asked, glancing at the woman across the table from Victor. I shook my head, barely able to keep my voice steady. She's at some charity event, apparently." Mark didn't respond right away, but his gaze darkened as he watched them. Victor laughing too loudly, the woman laughing right along with him. The way they leaned toward each other, the way she touched his arm, was like a scene out of a soap opera. I could feel the blood rushing to my face. I hated this. "Don't do it," Mark muttered, sensing the frustration in me before I could voice it. "Let it go." But I couldn't. Not after everything. Not after everything he said to Mark in front of all those people. "He's such a smug bastard," I said, low enough for only Mark to hear. "I hate him." "Don't even bother," Mark replied quietly, his voice controlled but firm. "Just ignore him." But it was too late. Victor had noticed us. He raised his glass, the smug bastard, and made a show of toasting us from across the room. "Here's to success," he called, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. I'm sure some people would love to have that kind of success. I could feel Mark's pulse go still beside me, his grip tightening on his glass. I was about to say something when suddenly the doors burst open and two men stormed in, gunmen, their faces masked, one of them waving a pistol in the air. "Everyone down! Now!" one of them shouted, his voice grating through the restaurant. Panic erupted around us. Chairs scraped across the floor, glasses tipped over, spilling wine. The gunman fired into the ceiling, and I heard a woman scream. I instinctively grabbed Mark's arm, but he was already pulling me down. "Stay down," he said, his voice low but intense. He shoved me behind a pillar, his body blocking me from view as people scrambled around us. I could hear the sounds of frantic feet, the nervous breath of terrified people. "Mark," I whispered, shaking. "What's happening?" "Stay down, Laura. Stay behind me," he said again, his voice harder. "Don't move." I nodded, but I couldn't help peeking out from behind the pillar. I saw one of the robbers threatening an elderly couple, demanding their jewelry. The woman cried, her hands trembling as she fumbled with her rings. And then my eyes found Victor. He was ducking under the table, clutching the young woman's purse in front of him like some kind of shield. He wasn't even trying to protect her. It was pathetic. Mark saw it too. His jaw tightened. "I can't just let this happen," he muttered, his voice tight. He looked around, his eyes scanning for something, anything that could help. His gaze landed on the breadboard resting on a nearby table. Without a word, he shot out from behind the pillar, grabbed it, and threw it with all his strength at the robber standing near the kitchen. The breadboard hit its target, hard, and the robber dropped, stunned. Mark didn't waste a second. He lunged at the downed man, wrestling him to the ground, and in the chaos managed to wrestle the gun from the robber's hand. I could hardly breathe, watching him fight, taking down a man twice his size with raw instinct and desperation. Mark looked at me for a split second, his eyes wild, determined. "Stay down," he said again, before turning back to the robber on the ground, still struggling to maintain control. Outside, I could hear the sirens wailing, getting closer. The air inside the bistro was thick with fear, punctuated by the echoing shouts of the robbers. As I looked around, everything seemed to slow down. The gunmen were panicking too, probably more nervous than any of us, their hands shaking as they barked orders. One of them grabbed a bottle of wine from a nearby table and smashed it on the floor, glaring at everyone like we were all some kind of threat. Laura was pressed behind me, and I kept telling her to stay low, stay quiet. I could feel her heart racing as I kept my eyes locked on the situation unfolding in front of us. The elderly couple near us was trembling, their hands shaking as one of the robbers pointed the gun at the man, demanding his wedding ring. "Please, please don't!" the woman cried, her voice barely audible. I wanted to do something. I had to. But I had to wait for the right moment. The robbers kept barking orders, their faces covered, but their eyes wild. One of them moved toward the back, scanning the room, looking for anyone who might make a move. That's when I saw it, a heavy breadboard sitting on a table nearby. My eyes darted toward the robber, who had his back turned, and I knew it was now or never. I took a deep breath, steadied my grip, and hurled the breadboard at the robber. It hit him square in the chest. He staggered back, and the gun slipped from his hands. My instincts took over. I sprinted forward, tackling him to the ground before he could react. The moment we hit the floor, I grabbed the gun, pinning him down with every ounce of strength I had. "Stay down!" I yelled, trying to keep the gun steady, my heart hammering in my chest. The room fell silent for a moment, then chaos erupted again. "Get down!" I shouted to the others, just as the second robber spun around to face me. He wasn't alone for long. An off-duty cop, one of the regulars I'd seen around the bistro, lunged from behind and tackled the second robber. The two went down in a tangled mess, the robber struggling to break free. "Hold him!" the cop yelled, his voice gruff but determined. A bartender appeared from the back with a baseball bat, swinging it hard, knocking the robber's gun from his hand. It happened fast, too fast. I didn't have time to think. I only had time to act. The robber, disoriented, tried to scramble up, but the cop had already flipped him over and secured him. I stood, my hands still shaking, my legs unsteady. I looked around. The chaos was winding down, but not the fear, not the disbelief on everyone's faces. I was still trying to process what had just happened when a sharp sting on my arm made me flinch. I looked down and saw the blood. A shard of broken glass had sliced through my skin during the struggle. "Mark!" Laura's voice cracked as she rushed over to me, her face pale, her eyes wide with concern. "I'm fine," I said, trying to reassure her as I winced from the cut. But I couldn't deny the look in her eyes, the worry that didn't seem to fade even as the paramedics moved in to patch me up. "They're going to be okay, right?" she asked, her voice still tight with tension. She grabbed my hand, squeezing it harder than I expected. Her voice was strained as she added, "You did that? You stopped them." I shook my head. I had to. I couldn't let them hurt anyone. The paramedics wrapped my arm quickly, giving me a glance of sympathy as they worked. But I wasn't the one who needed sympathy right now. The cop who had helped was talking to the reporters, his voice calm as he explained what had happened. "That man," he said, nodding toward me, "probably saved a lot of lives tonight. Those robbers had a history, a violent one." "I don't feel like a hero," I said quietly, my voice hoarse from everything that had just happened. Laura was still holding my hand, but her grip was firm now, and I could feel the pride radiating off her. "You are one," she said softly, looking at me with something that felt almost like awe. "You didn't hesitate." "I didn't have time," I said, swallowing hard. "It wasn't about being a hero. It was about keeping you safe." A reporter approached me, microphone in hand, asking all the usual questions. I tried to answer as briefly as possible, but there was something about the way the reporter looked at me, like they were expecting me to give them some grand speech about bravery. I wasn't about to give them one. "It wasn't heroism," I said, glancing down at the bandage wrapped around my arm. "It was survival. I did what I had to do." Laura leaned in, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "Not everyone would have acted like you did, Mark. You didn't just save us. You saved them too." I met her gaze, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself believe her. The police arrived, taking over the scene, and as they cuffed the robbers, I let the full weight of everything sink in. Tonight had changed everything. "Mark," Laura whispered again, her voice shaking slightly. "You're not just a hero. You're my hero." And in that moment, I realized that for all the chaos, for all the fear that had gripped me tonight, maybe this was what had been missing from my life. Someone to believe in me, not just as a house painter or as the guy who'd been humiliated in a lobby, but as me, the man who acted when it mattered most. I squeezed her hand back, finally letting go of the tension in my body, the tension I hadn't even known I was holding. Maybe it wasn't just about surviving anymore. Maybe it was about living too. The chaos from the robbery had barely settled when the police arrived, and the sirens outside finally seemed to drown out the echoes of panic that had filled the room just moments before. I stood there, barely processing what had happened. I hadn't been thinking about heroism. I hadn't been thinking about anything except making sure Laura was safe. A paramedic approached, her eyes scanning me for injuries. "You okay?" she asked, her tone professional, but with a hint of concern. "I'm fine," I said, though I could feel the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, the shallow cut from broken glass stinging on my arm. "Just a scratch." She didn't argue, just bandaged me up quickly before moving on to others. Laura didn't leave my side. She stayed right there, her hand still gripping mine tightly. But it wasn't just fear in her eyes now. There was something else, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Pride. "You saved everyone," she said softly, her voice trembling, but I could see her eyes shining. I wanted to tell her I wasn't thinking about saving anyone, that I was just trying to protect her. But I didn't have the words. Instead, I just gave her a nod, trying to downplay the whole thing. The cop who had jumped in to help with the second robber finished talking to the officers and walked over to us, giving me a nod of approval. "You did good, man. Saved some lives tonight. Those robbers weren't just after cash, they've got a record." I glanced at the two men now in custody. They were being led out of the restaurant, their hands cuffed, their faces ashen. "Didn't even think, just acted," I said, trying to make sense of it, though the words felt hollow coming out of my mouth. "You acted like a hero," the cop said, a small grin tugging at his lips. "Not a lot of people would have done what you did." I didn't respond. I didn't want to be called a hero. I didn't want any of the attention. My head was already spinning with everything that had happened, and the last thing I wanted was to feel like I was some kind of poster boy for bravery. I could feel Laura's eyes on me, though, the way she looked at me, like she was seeing me for the first time again, and it made my chest tighten. This wasn't how I wanted her to see me, not like this. "Mark," she said, her voice firm, "not everyone would have stepped in like that. You don't have to downplay it. You are a hero." I shook my head. "I just did what I had to do. That's all." Her eyes softened, but she didn't push it. She just kept holding my hand as we stood there, waiting for the chaos to settle. The paramedics had finished tending to everyone else, and a few officers were taking statements from the remaining patrons. I was trying to process the whole night, but it still didn't seem real. One minute, we were just a couple trying to enjoy a night out, and the next, well, it felt like the world had tilted on its axis. Eventually, the police started to clear the restaurant, and I turned to Laura. "Let's go. I think I've had enough excitement for one night." Laura nodded, and we made our way to the door. The restaurant was still buzzing with murmurs from the other patrons, but there was no more panic. People were slowly going back to their tables, finishing their meals, acting like nothing had happened. But for me, nothing would ever be the same. As we walked out into the cool night air, Laura looked up at me, her voice calm but full of emotion. "Mark, what you did in there, it was incredible. I'm proud of you." I didn't say anything, but I felt the weight of her words settle into me. She was proud of me. That meant more than anything. The drive home was quiet. I had no idea what to say. I was still too keyed up to even think straight. When we finally got home, I walked in and collapsed onto the couch. Laura sat down beside me, her hand resting on my arm. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, closing my eyes for a moment. "Yeah, just still processing." She didn't push. Instead, she just leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. It felt good, having her close. After a while, I spoke again, my voice quieter. "I didn't do anything special, just acted." "You did," she insisted. "You acted when it mattered most." I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I'm not looking for a medal." She grinned at that, the tension finally lifting between us. "You're a hero whether you like it or not," she said. "And I don't care what anyone else thinks. You saved lives tonight." I couldn't help but chuckle. "You really think so?" "I know so," she said, her voice warm and certain. I leaned back into the couch, the exhaustion of the night settling over me like a blanket. But for once, I didn't feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. Maybe it wasn't just about surviving. Maybe it was about finding something bigger than myself. And for the first time, I realized that even if I didn't feel like a hero, maybe, just maybe, being that kind of man wasn't so bad after all. The following days after the robbery felt like a blur. News vans parked outside the bistro, reporters with their microphones trying to catch any details. I wanted to crawl under a rock and forget it all, but the reality was there, staring me down in the form of flashing headlines and endless interviews. I kept my head down. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, but I avoided the calls I knew would just be noise. What was I supposed to say? How could I explain it? The reality of what happened kept crashing down on me, like waves I couldn't outrun. Laura, on the other hand, was still glowing with pride every time she looked at me. I couldn't figure out how to respond to that. She kept saying I'd done something incredible, something no one else would have done. But all I could think about was what had happened after the robbers were subdued. The way Victor had cowered under his table, clutching that woman's purse like it was his only lifeline. A week later, I was walking into my office when Laura pulled me aside with that familiar excitement in her voice. She was holding her phone, her face lighting up like a Christmas tree. "Guess what?" she said, practically vibrating with excitement. "What?" I asked, trying to shake off the fatigue that was hanging on me. "Victor's been fired." She paused, letting it sink in. "He lost it in a meeting, accused leadership of conspiring against him, insulted the female partners, claimed the CEO set him up. They had to escort him out." I stared at her, taking a second to process the news. "Seriously?" "Yeah, it's all over the news," she said, swiping through her phone to show me the headline. "Law firm partner terminated after viral video humiliation." There was a picture of Victor looking completely disheveled, leaving the building, flanked by security. I couldn't help but smirk. "Well, looks like karma showed up a little late." Laura's eyes softened, and she reached out to squeeze my arm. "You did the right thing, Mark. You were the one who stood up when it mattered." "Maybe," I said, a little uneasy. "But now, everything's a damn circus. I didn't want any of this." Laura shook her head. "This isn't just about you, Mark. It's about what happened to him, what he did to you, and everyone's seeing it now." I couldn't deny it. The video was everywhere, on every major news outlet, social media blowing up with people mocking Victor. He wasn't the only one suffering, though. There were whispers in the office, murmurs from Laura's co-workers, not even trying to hide it anymore. They watched him unravel in real time. I think some of them were almost glad. At home, it was a different story. My business was booming. Calls started flooding in, people hearing about my heroic act, even though I still didn't see it that way. I wasn't some superhero. I was just a guy who reacted. But business was business. I was getting more jobs than I could handle, and soon I had to hire help. I wasn't used to turning down projects, but the reality of my schedule set in. "Mark, are you okay?" Laura asked one evening as I stared at the pile of work orders on the table. She was standing behind me, her voice full of concern. "I know this all feels like a lot, but you've been on fire lately. Just make sure you're not burning out." I forced a smile. "I'll be fine, just getting used to everything changing so fast." I didn't tell her about the nights I spent awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell was going to happen next. But she was right. It wasn't just the business that had changed. The whole dynamic at work had shifted. Laura had also gotten a second promotion. She was now the assistant to the managing partner. I could see the pride in her eyes every time she talked about it. "Everything's moving so fast, huh?" I said, shaking my head as I looked at her, feeling the weight of it all. "A week ago, you were just a case coordinator. And now I'm this," she grinned, but there was a softness to her smile, like she still couldn't believe it. "I'm proud of you," I said quietly, more to myself than to her. But she heard it. "You should be. We've come a long way." I reached out and took her hand. "Yeah, we really have." In the quiet moments, I thought about how all of this came to be. The promotion, the robbery, everything that had led up to it. The humiliation, the decision to step in when I didn't even have time to think. It was like I'd stumbled into a version of myself I didn't know existed. And yet, as the days passed, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe the world wasn't so big and indifferent after all. Maybe I was here for a reason. Not just to scrape by or put up with insults, but to make a difference. And maybe that's what the real point of all of this was. That night, when Laura and I sat down to dinner, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it, then shot me a quick, surprised look. "What?" I asked, suddenly feeling uneasy. "It's from HR. They're calling me in tomorrow. They want to talk about Victor." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." Laura rolled her eyes. "It's probably just paperwork. With everything happening, they need to cover their bases." I wasn't so sure. I knew Victor had isolated himself at work. He was a mess, clearly trying to figure out how to recover from all of it. And I wondered if his downfall was far from over. "Stay sharp," I told her. "Just don't let them push you around." She smiled at me, her eyes full of affection. "I'm fine, Mark, but I know you'll have my back if anything goes wrong." "You know I will," I said, leaning in for a kiss. But as I pulled back, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, not just with Victor, but with everything around us. The world had a funny way of turning upside down when you least expected it, and it felt like it was just getting started. The morning after the firing felt surreal. I had no idea how to process everything. It wasn't just about Victor being fired, it was the whole mess of it. The video, the comments, the headlines. It was everywhere. I was suddenly aware of how much attention this had all drawn, and I didn't like it. But there was something else on my mind. Laura was practically glowing when she called me at lunch. "Guess who's been promoted again?" she asked, her voice practically dancing over the phone. "Assistant to the managing partner." My heart swelled for her. "That's amazing," I said, trying to keep the surprise from my voice. I was proud, but I knew it wasn't just about the promotion. It was what she had earned, not just because of the job, but because of the way she'd handled everything in the past weeks. "Well, I think it's because I'm a survivor," she laughed, her tone light. "I'm officially one of the big shots now." I grinned, despite the turmoil in my head. "Look at you. I'm married to someone important." She laughed again, but I could hear the subtle hint of something deeper. She had earned that respect, had earned her place, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride that didn't quite mix with the oddness of it all. The fame, the attention, the focus on us because of that damn video. And then it hit me. My business was booming. The phone rang off the hook. People who had heard about what had happened suddenly wanted to hire me. I hadn't done any marketing in years, but now my name was on everyone's lips. "Your hero moment is working for both of us, huh?" Laura said one night as we stood in the kitchen, her eyes scanning the emails and messages flooding in. "Yeah," I muttered, scanning a few of the job requests. "Guess I'm officially in the spotlight. Funny how that works." Laura chuckled, but then got quiet for a moment. "What about Victor? Have you heard from him?" I shifted on my feet, feeling the familiar knot in my stomach at the mention of his name. "Yeah, I've seen the reports," I said, feeling the anger flare in my chest again. He got what he deserved. But Laura could tell there was something else I wasn't saying. She turned and fixed me with a steady look. "Mark, it's okay to admit this isn't just about him. You're still processing everything." "I'm fine," I replied quickly, too quickly. Just tired of seeing his face everywhere. She didn't push me. She never did when I didn't want to talk. But I knew she could tell I was holding something back. She'd seen me through enough, and the weight of it all was sitting heavily in the back of my mind. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was an email from an unfamiliar address, Elaine Hale. I clicked it open, surprised. Her message was short, almost terse, but with an unexpected note of gratitude. "Mark, thank you for what you did. I saw the full footage and I know about Victor. He's been lying to me for years, and this video, it's shown me everything I needed to see. I'm leaving him, and I wanted to thank you for protecting my nephew during that mess. I hope you and Laura are doing well." Elaine? My stomach churned. I sat there rereading her words. Victor's affair, the cowardice he showed in that restaurant, and now this. It was more than I'd expected to deal with. I had no idea what to say, so I did nothing. I just closed the email, staring at the screen for a while. Laura came in from the other room. "Everything okay?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. I turned the screen toward her. She read the email in silence, her eyes softening as she got to the end. "I guess this is the fallout we didn't expect," she said quietly, handing me back the phone. "She's leaving him," I muttered, feeling a pang of guilt in my chest. I never wanted any of this to happen, just wanted to get through the night, but it's a mess now. "I don't think anyone saw this coming, Mark," she said, her hand reaching for mine. "Elaine's life. It wasn't perfect. This just pulled the curtain back on everything." I let out a long breath. "I know, but I don't feel good about it. There's too much going on, too much that's out of my control. I didn't want to be part of this. I just wanted to protect you." Laura smiled softly. "You did more than that. You saved lives. You did something that mattered." "Yeah," I said, running my fingers through my hair. "But all this fallout, the media, the videos, the people, Victor losing everything, it's all bigger than what I thought." "Sometimes the world shifts in ways we can't predict," Laura said, her voice steady. "But what matters is that you stayed true to who you are. You didn't back down, Mark." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I believed them. But as I sat back, staring at the phone screen again, the weight of the email from Elaine settled in my chest. It wasn't just about Victor. It was about what the world thought of me now, what I had done, what it meant for my life. And that uncertainty gnawed at me, because no matter how many people called me a hero, it didn't change the fact that it all felt wrong. Later that afternoon, the phone rang again. This time, it was a number I recognized. Laura's voice broke through the silence of the room. "Victor's been fired," she said, her voice barely containing the excitement. "He had a meltdown during a meeting, accused the partners of conspiring against him. He's out, and they're reporting it everywhere." I didn't know what to feel. I wasn't surprised, but the weight of everything that had happened, Victor's downfall, the media frenzy, the fact that this entire event had shaped our lives in ways I hadn't anticipated, settled in a strange silence between us. "I think this is just the beginning," I said quietly. "For him. For us." Laura looked at me, her eyes still filled with the light from before. "For us, Mark. We're moving forward. You don't have to carry it all by yourself." And in that moment, I realized she was right. We were moving forward, together. The news hit like a storm I couldn't outrun. Victor was gone, fired. I'd expected it, but hearing it from Laura, seeing it plastered across the news, law firm partner terminated after viral video humiliation, made it feel like the world had just decided to tear him down in front of everyone. I knew the headlines would be relentless, but hearing the full story made my stomach churn. He'd gone off the rails, accused leadership of conspiring against him, insulted female partners. It was like everything he'd hidden, his affair, his arrogance, his whole false persona, had come crashing down at once. The world was seeing what I'd always known. Victor Hale was a fraud. "What did HR say?" I asked, trying to stay focused on Laura's voice rather than the spinning thoughts in my head. "They're handling it," she replied, her tone tight. "But everyone's talking about it. People at work are just waiting for him to leave, for it to blow over, but it won't. It's all over the media." "Good riddance," I muttered, though there was a part of me that still felt uneasy about how everything had unfolded. Laura's face softened as she met my eyes. "You really don't have to feel bad about it, Mark. He did this to himself." "I don't know," I said, exhaling sharply. "I didn't want this. All of this. Just..." That night, I acted. And now, it's bigger than anything I imagined. She reached out, squeezing my hand. Sometimes things go the way they need to. You didn't make him act like that. I nodded, but didn't say anything more. We both knew the truth, but it didn't make it easier. The phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out without thinking. Another message about my business, another job offer, another reminder that the world had changed in ways I hadn't expected. "Mark, we've got to talk about the business," Laura said, her voice shaking me from my thoughts. "You're booked out for months. We're at a tipping point." "I know," I said, rubbing my temples, "but it's hard to think about the future when the present feels so out of control. Let's figure it out together. You've been juggling this alone for too long. Maybe it's time to get some help." I looked at her, the woman who'd stuck by me, even when everything felt like it was falling apart. "I've hired some help," I admitted, still feeling strange about it. "But I'm turning down projects, Laura. I've got too much already. I don't want to be swallowed by it." She nodded, her eyes lighting up. "That's good. You don't have to do everything. I'm here." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything from the past few weeks, Victor's fall, the aftermath of the robbery, the shift in my business, hanging in the air. "I don't know how to balance it all," I said quietly. "You'll figure it out," she said, her voice steady and warm. "We'll figure it out." We shared a moment of quiet, both of us unsure of what the future held, but with a sense of determination we hadn't had before. The next day, everything shifted again. I walked into my office, ready to tackle the flood of emails and job inquiries. And then I saw it. Another email from Victor's wife, Elaine. "Mark, I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for my nephew at the bistro. I know you don't expect anything for it, but I wanted to say it anyway. You saved his life, and for that, I'll always be grateful. I've seen the full footage of that night. I'm not blind to what Victor's been doing, and this video exposed more than I ever imagined. I'm leaving him. I hope you and Laura are doing well. Take care of yourselves. Elaine." I read it twice. My mind was a whirlwind. Elaine knew. She knew everything. And now, her life, her perfect life, was shattered. I looked up to see Laura standing in the doorway, waiting. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. I passed her my phone, letting her read the message. When she finished, she sighed, her voice low. Her perfect life was already broken, Mark. The video just exposed the truth. I felt a strange mix of guilt and inevitability. I hadn't expected this to happen. I hadn't planned on it. But there it was, Victor's lies, his affair, all laid bare. And Elaine, in the end, had made her choice. It was done. Laura didn't say anything more, but I could see she was thinking the same thing I was. That sometimes life doesn't give you a choice. You have to deal with the fallout, even if it's not your fault. The email lingered in my mind as I sat down at my desk. It was proof that what people projected wasn't always reality. Victor had built this facade of success, and now it was crumbling around him, taking everything with it. The phone rang again, pulling me back to the present. Another job, another request for a bid. "Mark, are you there?" Laura's voice cut through my thoughts. "We've got to talk." I leaned back in my chair. "Yeah, we do." And for the first time, I realized that everything had changed. And somehow, maybe that was okay. We were building something real together now, with all the mess and chaos that came with it. And maybe that was exactly what we both needed. I was cleaning up the kitchen when the doorbell rang. It was the first time in months that I didn't have a clue who could be standing on the other side. When I opened it, I wasn't prepared for who I found. Victor Hale. He looked different. Thinner, disheveled, like someone who had been beaten by the world and wasn't sure how to pick himself back up. His usual polished appearance was gone. He looked like a man who had lost everything. He stood there for a moment, just staring at me, like he didn't know where to begin. Finally, he spoke. "Mark, I owe you an apology." I was silent for a second, trying to read the situation. I couldn't tell if this was genuine or just some twisted version of a man trying to salvage whatever pride he had left. Victor ran a hand through his hair, then looked down, clearly uncomfortable in his own skin. "What I said to you that day, it was wrong. I judged you unfairly, and I'm ashamed of it." I stood there, trying to process. Was this really happening? The man who had humiliated me in front of everyone, the one who had looked down on me like I was nothing, was standing on my doorstep apologizing. "I was jealous, Mark," he continued, his voice quieter now. I was jealous of the life you have, the respect you've earned, the kind of man you are, and I don't know, I guess I thought if I kept pushing you down, it would make me feel bigger. But it didn't. It just made me smaller. I didn't know how to respond. I'd spent so long hating him for what he did to me, but now, in front of me, was a man who was clearly broken. It was strange. I almost felt sorry for him. Victor paused again, almost as if weighing his words. I've lost everything. My job, my family, the life I thought I had. It's all gone. I felt a pang of guilt. I didn't want to admit it, but there was part of me that was relieved. He deserved it. He had humiliated me, belittled Laura, made us feel small. But the man standing in front of me, this shell of the man he once was nothing like the arrogant jerk who would judge me. I've been thinking a lot about the man I want to be, Victor continued, shifting his weight uncomfortably. And I know I'm not that man yet. I'm moving to Arizona, working with my brother in his hardware store. I'm starting over. I have to. I nodded slowly. I'm not sure what you want me to say. Victor's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability in them. I wanted to apologize. I wanted you to know I was wrong. I didn't respond immediately. There was too much to process, but I could see the regret in his face, the way his shoulders had slumped, the way his pride had crumbled in the wake of everything. He wasn't the same man who'd mocked me in that lobby. You made your bed, Victor, I said, keeping my voice even. But that doesn't mean you can't change. Victor gave a slight nod, his eyes softening. I'm trying. I know it's too late for a lot of things, but I just wanted you to know that I regret what I did. I exhaled slowly, my mind swirling with everything that had happened, the humiliation, the robbery, the aftermath. I think you know what you need to do now. He gave a small smile, but it was tired, worn. Yeah, I think I do. When he left, I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, still trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. Part of me felt like I should have been angrier, like I should have told him to get lost, but there was something in his apology, something raw, that made it impossible to stay mad. I walked back into the kitchen, where Laura was waiting. She looked up at me, her expression questioning. He came here, I said, still processing it all. Victor, he apologized, said he was sorry for what he did, that he was jealous. Laura's eyebrows furrowed. What did you say? I told him he made his bed, but that doesn't mean he can't change. I shrugged, still feeling a little stunned by the entire exchange. He's moving to Arizona, trying to start over. She was quiet for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. You believe him? I looked at her, trying to decide how I felt. I think he's lost enough that he has to be serious about it. I don't know if he's changed yet, but at least he's trying. Laura sighed, walking over to me. You've always been better than me at forgiveness, even when they don't deserve it. I gave her a half smile. I don't know if I'm forgiving him, but I don't want to carry that hate anymore. It's too much. She nodded, squeezing my hand. I'm proud of you. It felt like a weight lifted from me, even if it was just a little bit. I wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was ready for it. And then, a few days later, something I never expected happened. Laura sat me down in our living room, her face glowing with something I couldn't quite place. She was quiet for a moment before she looked at me with a mixture of excitement and tenderness. Mark, she said, her voice soft. I have something to tell you. Yeah, I said, leaning in, my curiosity piqued. She smiled, her eyes brimming with emotion. I'm pregnant. I froze, the words sinking in. Wait, what? She laughed softly, holding my hand tighter. We're going to have a baby, Mark. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding, my thoughts racing. Everything I'd been through, every twist and turn, led to this moment. I hadn't known it was coming, hadn't expected it, but there it was, the future. I pulled her into a tight hug, my mind still spinning. I can't believe this. This is amazing. She laughed again, a little tear escaping her eye. I knew you'd be happy. And in that moment, I realized that for all the mess, for all the pain, this was the moment that mattered. I wasn't the man I thought I was a year ago. I was someone else now, someone who had survived, who had found his way. "Laura," I whispered, holding her close. "We're going to be okay. This is our time." She nodded, resting her head against my chest. "Yeah, we are." As I stood there, thinking about the chaos of the past few months and the future we were stepping into, I realized something important. I had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it. With Laura, with our baby, together. 6 months had passed since the robbery, and life had settled into something that felt real. We were in a new place now, a bigger place, one we could actually call our own. The old house had felt cramped with all the memories of the mess that had unfolded. The robbery, the viral fallout, everything. Now, this was our space. The space where we could breathe, where we could start fresh. I was still wrapping my head around it all, to be honest. The business was booming, and I had finally hired some help, which meant I wasn't turning down work left and right anymore. The job offers kept pouring in, and I was finally feeling like I was balancing it all. I didn't know how to handle the attention, but at least I was learning to live with it. People who'd heard about the robbery, about what happened with Victor, would stop me in the street, or sometimes call me from the news outlets. The hero house painter. I couldn't get used to it. But there was one thing that was different, one thing that had made it all worth it. Laura. She was glowing in a way I hadn't seen before. The promotions, the new responsibility, her newfound confidence. She was finally where she deserved to be, and I was watching her come into her own. For so long, I had worried about how the world saw us, how she might feel stuck, caught between the image she'd built for herself and what had happened with Victor. But not anymore. Tonight we were hosting a housewarming for friends and family, finally able to invite everyone into our new home. The place was filled with chatter and laughter, glasses clinking as people admired the space we'd built together. There was something different in the air tonight, a kind of peace. As the night wore on, I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker outside, my mind racing back to that night at the bistro, the panic, the chaos, and how it had all spiraled into something I never expected. The robbery had changed everything, but in a strange way, it had set things in motion. Laura came over and placed a hand on my shoulder, pulling me back into the present. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. I turned to face her, noticing the way her eyes shone. "Yeah, just thinking," she smiled, and for a moment, it was just us in the crowd of people. "About what?" I shrugged. "About everything, I guess. About how we got here. The house, the business, the changes, everything." Laura laughed softly, stepping closer. "You're always so focused on the bigger picture. I think we should just enjoy the moment." I reached out and pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I am enjoying it. Sometimes it doesn't feel real. You know, like, how did all of this happen?" "It's real because we made it happen," she said, her voice low, her lips brushing against my ear. "We've worked hard for this, Mark." I looked into her eyes, and something clicked. This was our life now. We were living it. No more worrying about what other people thought. No more looking over our shoulders, wondering if the next thing would tear us apart. This was it. She stepped back slightly, and I saw that look in her eyes. The one I'd seen when she shared the news about her promotion. The one that made my heart skip. "Mark," she said softly, taking my hands in hers. "There's something I need to tell you." My pulse quickened, nerves tingling. "What's up?" "I'm pregnant," she said, a slight smile tugging at her lips as she watched my reaction. For a second, everything went still. My mind blanked. Pregnant. I had no words. I just stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "Wait, what?" I finally managed, my voice cracking a little. She laughed softly, her eyes lighting up with the kind of joy I hadn't seen in a long time. "We're going to have a baby, Mark." I felt like the ground shifted beneath me. A baby, United States. I didn't know what to say. I had thought about the future before, but I hadn't imagined it like this. It was all so much, so fast. But in that moment, I realized something. "We're having a baby," I said, my voice hoarse, still trying to process the flood of emotions. Laura smiled, nodding. "Yes, we are." I felt this overwhelming wave of joy crash over me. I couldn't stop smiling, couldn't stop the flood of emotions that hit me all at once. It was like a weight had been lifted from my chest. I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling her warmth, her presence. The woman who had stood by me through all of it, Victor's insults, the robbery, everything. And now we were building something new together, a future, a family. "This is amazing," I whispered, still holding her, still in disbelief. She pulled back slightly, glancing over at the framed newspaper article on the wall, the one with the headline about the robbery, the one where I was labeled a hero. "Our child will know what kind of man their father is," she said softly, her eyes glistening. "The kind of man who stood up when it mattered. The kind of man I know I can always count on." I looked at the article and then back at her, still holding her close. For the first time, I really saw it, the man I was becoming. Not because of the accolades or the things people said, but because of who I was to her, to us. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I guess I am that kind of man." And in that moment, I realized Laura was right. This wasn't about the past anymore. It was about the future. And whatever that future held, I was ready to face it with her by my side. We were a team. And now we had more than just a new house. We had a family. And that was more than I could ever ask for.